Hello, writers. My name is Tennyson E. Stead. I am a working screenwriter and a working script doctor, and welcome to the Write Stuff. This week's class is the second class in a 6-week course on writing your show Bible and your pilot episode for a 60-minute long television series. And last week we worked through the episode breakdown and the pilot summary of your show Bible. We also talked a good bit about what a show Bible actually is and what we use them for in the industry. This week we're going to take that pilot episode synopsis and we're going to write the first act. Based on the work that you did breaking down your pilot summary, you've already taken the action that defines the first episode and you've broken it down into 4 acts. You know the big 4 things that your protagonist needs to do to carry their efforts to achieve their goal and the story of the series as a whole, from the very first thing that they do to achieve their goal through the end of the first episode. Now we're going to talk through the first of those 4 things. What is the very first thing your protagonist needs to do? The first challenging thing, mind you, the first thing requiring effort of them that they need to do to make this goal happen. Whatever it is, it's probably going to be pretty fundamental. It's probably going to be pretty basic. If your protagonist is investigating the existence of supernatural creatures, they need to find some evidence somewhere of supernatural creatures. They need to find some clue that these things exist at all. That's the first thing they have to do. So the first episode is about them looking for that evidence and looking for that clue, right? If your show is about somebody trying to build an award-winning restaurant, what's the very first thing that they need to do? To be honest, I don't know enough about the restaurant business to tell you. It's probably either finding a location. That's probably it. Like, you're going to have this set, whatever it is, for the whole rest of the series, right? Or at least until they upgrade the location. Certainly for your whole season, you're going to be stuck in this kitchen. Finding the kitchen, seeing it for the first time, figuring out where you're going to be. So the whole first episode is probably about this chef using whatever resources they have at their disposal to try and secure a kitchen. Now, the show is only interesting to watch if what the character is trying to accomplish doesn't come easily to them, because it's the effort that people watch. So if we have a show about a chef, if this episode is about a chef trying to get this restaurant open, finding a kitchen, building their kitchen team, whatever the case may be, they don't have the resources to do that. You know, maybe it's that they don't have the money, maybe it's that they don't have the reputation, maybe it's that everybody hates them, it doesn't matter. But if the first step is them trying to find a kitchen, then there's a lot of complications into getting that kitchen, right? It's got to be someplace they can actually afford, someplace that's going to actually let them in for the money that they have. It's got to be someplace that meets the chef's standards, whatever those standards happen to be. And if those standards are unreasonable, then finding a compromise, especially if the chef is the person in charge, finding a compromise between, a place that's willing to do business with this person on a financial level and a place that actually has the resources that this chef needs, that's going to take a lot of effort. They're going to have to check out a lot of kitchens and argue with a lot of landlords before they finally make their way into the kitchen that's actually going to define this show. And you wind up with a first act that's kind of like trying on sets to find one that fits the show you're actually trying to make. I think that that's fun and interesting, but the larger sort of thing to take away from this is that you don't need to set things up here. You don't need to front load the story with establishing information, because the efforts of the characters to achieve their goals will carry that information in the subtext. If we see this chef running around town arguing with landlords, telling them that they need to accept a lower price because he's going to turn their neighborhood into a hotspot, and he's going to raise all the property values, and he's the wonderkind, and he's a genius, and nobody understands the impact of having him in this building, then it's pretty obvious he doesn't have any money. You don't need to establish that. You don't need to have him sit down with the bank and go, we just can't justify your loan, Craig. You don't need that scene. That scene, all the information that you're trying to communicate in that scene is embedded in the rest of the show. So don't go handing the audience information about your characters. Just let the characters perform the actions that drive their goals forward, but specifically make sure that you're focusing on the actions that are challenging. Because the resources that your characters bring to bear, the resources that they fail to bring to bear, and the resources that they're looking for, the relationships that they leverage, all of that stuff is going to communicate everything that that character has access to and everything that character doesn't have access to. Don't worry about trying to paint a picture of what's happening in the show. Don't tell the story of what's happening or what happened. Just focus on the efforts of the characters to achieve their goals. And as long as those efforts are strongly motivated and as long as they're overwhelmingly challenging, the tone, the contextual information, the emotionality, we're going to find out. If this chef isn't finding immediate success, trying to find a place to host his dream, then we're going to find out how this person handles rejection pretty damn quick. We're going to find out how this person handles stress. We're going to find out how this person specifically handles financial stress and the conflict between money and art. We're going to find those things out right up front as he tries to do, or she tries to do, or they try to do a good job of securing the space that they're going to be using, right? This leads me to another point, which is something that I covered in my course on feature filmmaking, but you're here to write television. You may not have watched it. So let's talk a little bit about this. One of the tricks that actors learn very early on in their careers, at least if they work in theater, something that they actually, I don't know if this information is something they teach in acting classes or if it just gets kind of like passed down between friends or what. But every actor I've ever known has understood the basic idea that you can't play drunk convincingly. If you try to, wobble yourself and you pretend to be off balance, if you pretend to slur your speech, it looks like you're pretending to be drunk. And there's no way you can do that so convincingly that it doesn't look like you're pretending to be drunk, because you are trying to sell the idea of being drunk, right? You have to try and pretend to be sober. You have to try and hold your gaze steady. You have to try and stop shaking. You have to try and hold your voice steady. And the harder you're trying to do those things, the harder you're trying to maintain eye contact and control your enunciation, the more obviously drunk you are, because nobody has to do those things unless they're super drunk. The harder you're trying to do them, the more we can see you're struggling. Okay? The same concept applies to the communication of any emotion or state that a character might be in. You don't need to showcase a character's frustration. You just need to let that character try their hardest to look cool. You don't need to showcase a character's fear. You just need to let that character try their hardest to appear brave. The harder they're trying, the more scared they are. So, you don't need to break the action and have a scene of emotional exposition in order to showcase that something's hard for a character. Just let it be hard for the character. Throw them right into the next scene. Don't give them a break. Because their best is going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And if they are so motivated that they can't stop trying, we're going to see the quality of their efforts erode very quickly to the point where they are actually acting in a very self-destructive way, where they're actually undermining their efforts by not stopping and not taking a break. And then maybe at some point they realize they need a break. And if they take a break in order to make their situation better, to make their goals more achievable, that's active. But you don't want someone else coming in and telling them to take a break. You want the character to be driving the story forward through their efforts to achieve their goal at all times. And the point here is, if you focus on that, you're going to wind up with emotional scene work. You don't need to add the emotion as a separate scene where you reveal the inner life of your character. This isn't a novel. Okay? The core difference between screenwriting and writing for literature, frankly, writing for actors in general and writing for literature, is that literature is all about making observations. Here's what's happening to this character. Here's how it affects them. And if we make those observations with as much art and cunning as possible, then we're good writers, okay? And we connect those observations into a story using theme. Here's what's happening to this character. It's big. It involves a number of events. All of them are connected by these issues or whatever's happening. And now the character is reacting to each of those things in a different way, and let's watch and let's see how these events transform this character. That's good literature. It keeps the reader reading, because especially if we've juxtaposed the themes, if we have forces applied to a character that involve, for example, insecurity, but also a demand for leadership, we know those things as a reader. We know those things don't coexist very well. There's an imbalance there. What's going to happen? So the reader has to keep reading to find out. In a movie theater or on TV when you're sitting at home, the audience doesn't keep reading to find out. They're sitting there waiting. If the show is about what's happening to your character and how they react, then the audience is always waiting for something to happen. But if the show is about what the protagonist is doing to achieve their goals, along with what the other characters are doing to achieve their goals, then the protagonist is watching. They're engaged. Or the audience is watching. They're engaged. Okay? So, don't take breaks from the story to illuminate certain aspects of the character's life. Let those aspects be exactly what they are. If the character is bad at managing their emotions, let them try to be good at managing their emotions while they're trying to push their goal forward. And I guarantee you, it's going to backfire on them. They're going to get worse and worse at managing their emotions until they start creating problems for themselves. You won't even need to introduce, extra stuff to draw that out of them, because they are doing something overwhelmingly challenging. They are already applying more pressure to themselves than you possibly can through external stuff. So that's one thing to talk about. Something else to talk about here as we go into this is just the anatomy of a scene. What is a scene? And how that pertains to the 3-act structure. Because really the 3-act structure is just a byproduct of action-based conflict. If a character is pursuing a goal, and if they are highly motivated, if they are unwilling to quit trying to pursue that goal because of some internal drive, and by the way, we want that drive to be internal. We want that drive to come from inside the character, because if it's a reaction to external circumstances, then it has a shelf life. If a character is only interested in pursuing supernatural events because their dad may have been killed by a werewolf, then there comes a point where they need to let go of their dad, and then the show is dead until we find out that, oh wait, my sister was also killed by werewolves. Oh, I got to avenge my sister. We have to invent new reasons for the character to be in the show. Whereas if they're just curious and they think the world needs to know how the world actually works, that's a stronger motivation. It's tempting to try and rationalize these stronger motivations. It's easier to discuss, kind of makeshift, gimmicky motivations in a production meeting because not everybody feels the drive to change the world. Not everybody wants to be president. Not everybody wants to be an astronaut. Not everybody wants to be a paranormal investigator. Not everybody has the drive. So if you're sitting in a room full of people, not everybody's going to feel as connected to that essential push to achieve something great. But when they watch it, they will feel that connection because it pulls them in. Watching the person do the thing pulls them in. So ultimately, you don't need some kind of inciting incident to drive your character into the story. You want them to go into the story for their own reasons. You don't need to set that up in the first act either. Okay? So if we have a character that has this strong motivation, and if the thing that they're trying to accomplish is so overwhelmingly challenging, so outside of their abilities, that it is not sustainable, it is doomed to failure, then you have a rock in a hard place situation. That character is going to push that goal until eventually their efforts implode upon themselves. Eventually, they're going to have tried so hard to achieve this thing that they have invested all of their resources, all of everything they can bring to the table, and it still hasn't worked. And now all that stuff is spent, and now what? And their life comes crashing down. To the extent that they're invested in this goal, their life is over. But they still feel that motivation. They still understand that what they were trying to achieve is good, so they need to find a new way forward. That's the 3-act structure. You're going to find that that structure repeats itself in each episode that you write. It's no coincidence that TV dramas are 4 acts long. You get the first act, which inevitably is going to be Act 1. You get the second act, which is going to be the first half of Act 2. You get the third act, which is going to be the second half of Act 2. And then you get the fourth act, which is Act 3. The first act takes you through the first turning point. The second act takes you through the midpoint. The third act takes you through the second turning point. And the fourth act finishes the action. And then again, in a scene, you have a character trying to accomplish something that they're not going to achieve. The first act is their introductory effort, just making sure that they're set up to succeed in their effort. If they need to talk to someone, then they're trying to make a good impression, whatever it is, whatever that introductory effort is. And then they commit. Once they've set themselves up to succeed to the best of their ability, they go in to try and make this thing happen, and it's not going to happen for whatever reason, until eventually their efforts implode, and then they have to try something different. They have to rethink their approach. And just because they're rethinking their approach, and just because they're digging deeper and trying something different, that doesn't mean it's going to work. So we have our chef, let's say, walking in to talk to a real estate agent about a space, and this real estate agent's job is to get money for their client, and the chef's job is to get a kitchen. And let's say this is the most beautiful, let's say they started with, of course, the dream kitchen. So they walk in and they're totally committed to getting this space. They're not going to let it slip through their fingers. No way. No way. So they spend the first, 45 seconds telling this person how amazing they are, and look at all my awards, and renowned, blah, 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 blah. So what's it going to take to get you to sign? And the real estate agent is like, it's going to take this amount of money. Okay, well, let's... Then the chef starts trying to talk around the deal and find some other way to close this thing. And there is no other way to close it. This person needs money. So the chef just schmoozes and schmoozes and schmoozes until eventually they have nothing left but to throw their way. Do you know who I am? And now we're going, it's like, oh, dude. Until maybe they get the cops called on them. That would be a worst case scenario. If they get dragged out of this kitchen in handcuffs because they couldn't take no for an answer, and they refuse to let this real estate agent off the hook, and they're going to try and, they're getting dragged off, and you're going to regret this. You're going to come back to me. That's the end of the scene. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to make a list of all the things your protagonist needs to do in order to achieve that first big goal that completes Act 1 and moves us into Act 2. Whatever that goal happens to be, make a list of all the things your protagonist would need to do to actually get that crossed off their list and completed. What does your protagonist have to do in order to make the action of Act 2 the very next step in their efforts to accomplish their goal? Make a list of all those things, whatever they happen to be. And then you sit down and you write the scenes where they do each of those things. Each scene is about the efforts of the protagonist to achieve one of those goals. And you begin that scene with them starting their effort to achieve the goal. And you cut that scene off as soon as it becomes obvious that they're getting what they want, or they need to go find it some other place. As soon as one of those two things is established to the protagonist. Just because it's obvious to the audience doesn't mean the protagonist is done trying. Okay? Some protagonists are more self-aware than others. But as soon as that effort is complete, as soon as there's no more effort to be made to accomplish that goal, you cut the camera and you walk away. No victory laps, no discussing the meaning of it. because the meaning of it is self-evident. You don't need if the protagonist needs to talk about their feelings to move forward to the next scene, then they need to go find someone to talk to about those feelings. They need to work that out for themselves. That becomes an action that they need to pursue. What you don't want to do is have some other character come in and talk those feelings out of the character for the sake of the audience. Some characters don't need to talk about their feelings, and it's still going to be obvious what they're feeling even if you don't get to have your say about it, even if you're not making observations. Literature is built on our ability to make artful, concise, interesting, engaging observations. Our audience, whether we're sitting at home, whether we're in a movie theater, whether we're watching a play, does not want our observations because they come to watch. I know this sounds reductive, but they come to watch, which means they want to make their own observations. The reason why we build our stories around action is because building them around our observational abilities as writers undermines the role of the audience. It undermines their ability to engage with us. And that's probably the worst thing we can do. So we need to find our bread and butter somewhere else. That's why dramatic structure is built on action. So, make a list of all the things your protagonist needs to do to achieve their goal. Write the scenes where they do those things. And now you're 1/4 of the way through your pilot script. The one other thing I want to discuss before we leave is the idea of a cold open. Some studios, some streaming services are going to ask you for a little tag scene in the front. For example, going back to X-Files and going back to our conversation about how sometimes earlier television shows were not written with the same standards of dramatic structure that we're accustomed to today, and how they created conventions. Okay? A cold open is the opening scene before the credits of a television show where something happens that reveals the themes and concepts of the episode you're about to watch. So, for example, if you're watching a supernatural investigation show, this could be the opening scene where someone gets turned into a werewolf or someone gets abducted by aliens or whatever the case may be, and now in comes the investigator after the credits roll, right? Cold opens are supposed to be short, effective, to the point, revealing about the content and themes of the episode, and that's fine. That's great. It is still a scene between two actors or more. So the key to writing an effective cold open is to not make a scene about something happening to somebody. You want your characters at all times to be humanized through their efforts to achieve their respective goals. So the key here is to make sure that every actor in the scene is in the scene because they're trying to accomplish something that's part of their own big picture. Every character in the scene is trying to achieve their own overwhelmingly challenging goal for their own very internal, very strong, very powerful motivations. So if this is, as far as the marketing team is concerned, if this is a scene about someone getting turned into a werewolf, then let one of these characters be, if it's a date, for example, if a guy's going out with a girl and turns out she's a werewolf and he gets bitten, he needs to be trying to accomplish something by dating this woman that he doesn't stop trying to accomplish just because he gets bitten and becomes a werewolf. And she's trying to accomplish something by dating him that she doesn't stop trying to accomplish just because she's bitten him and now he's a werewolf. She bit him because it was part of her plan, and he's got his goal. Maybe his goal is to find a good wife, or that it doesn't matter. The point is, each character on the screen is made up of an action and a motivation. And just because you're writing a scene that other people in the production see as a throwaway scene at the beginning of your story doesn't let you off the hook when it comes to giving your actors the tools that they need to perform. Dive deep. Find actions for those characters, and those characters are going to be much more meaningful and much more interesting to watch as the episode progresses, because whatever they're trying to achieve is inevitably going to be in conflict with the investigators and the protagonists of the show. or if the character gets eaten or whatever, that loss is going to be felt much more profoundly by the audience because you've snipped that action halfway through. So, go ahead and write down all the things your character needs to do to see their goal through the end of the first act and the beginning of the second act. Write those scenes. Come back next week for your next bit of homework, and you're a quarter of the way through your pilot script. Congratulations. Thank you very much for showing up to the right stuff. I'll see you next week. I look forward to learning with you.